The scent of pine needles and expensive beeswax candles could not mask the faint metallic tang of desperation hanging in the air of Robert Vance's sprawling Chicago penthouse. Eleanor Ellie Vance, 69 years old and recently widowed, felt it keenly. She had arrived 3 days before Christmas, traveling from her small, quiet farmstead in Iowa, ostensibly to spend the holidays with her 2 children, Robert and Diana. In reality, the trip was a pilgrimage to the heart of their ambition. Ellie had always been the quiet strength in the marriage, managing the household and the small, visible portion of the family finances, while her late husband, Thomas, built his successful, though publicly modest, agricultural consulting firm. Thomas's death 6 months prior had left Ellie in a state of controlled vulnerability. She was lonely, yes, but she was not, as her children believed, suddenly helpless or financially naive. Robert, her 45-year-old son, was a high-frequency commodities trader. He measured success in Porsches and quarterly gains. He was perpetually stressed and perpetually in debt, always leveraging his next big move. His wife, Chelsea, treated their home as a museum of minimalist luxury, and she viewed Ellie as a necessary, inconvenient relic of a less sophisticated time. Diana, Ellie's 40-year-old daughter, was a perpetual entrepreneur, a term that meant she started many businesses that failed quickly, leaving her relying on her parents to smooth over the resulting debts. She lived an expensive, social media-fueled life in Miami that her meager income could never support. Their shared conviction, the premise for this entire forced holiday gathering, was simple. Thomas's death meant his estate, however small, was now liquid, and Ellie was too grief-stricken and unsophisticated to manage it. The target of their attention was Eleanor's primary checking and savings account, held at the small local Iowa bank. They knew Thomas had maintained a balance that usually hovered between $200,000 and $350,000, liquid cash for farm upkeep and immediate needs. In their minds, this visible account was the key to their immediate financial relief. Over the first few days, the inquiries were subtle, wrapped in layers of false concern. "Mom, you really shouldn't be worrying your sweet head about the farm taxes," Robert said one evening, pouring himself a third glass of 15-year-old scotch. "Just give me the access to the Iowa federal account, and I'll handle all the bill payments for you. Consider it an early Christmas gift from your devoted son." "No, thank you, Robert. I'm quite capable of paying the taxes," Ellie replied, her voice soft but firm, a tone they always misinterpreted as frailty. Diana, sitting nearby scrolling through images of designer handbags she couldn't afford, adopted a dramatic sigh. "Oh, Mom, look at you. You're stressed. You lost Dad, and now you have to deal with complex bank transfers? It's too much. I mean, what if something happened to you? We'd be scrambling trying to figure out where your assets are." "My assets are exactly where Thomas and I placed them, dear," Ellie said, knitting calmly. She knew their game. They were testing the waters, trying to find the path of least resistance to the password. What they didn't know was that Thomas, having observed his children's escalating entitlement for the last 2 decades, had prepared meticulously. Just 3 months before his passing, Thomas had sat down with Ellie. He didn't speak of death, only of structural integrity. "Ellie," he had said, pointing to a battered leather ledger filled with archaic bond certificates, "the Vance Foundation's future relies on discretion. The children only know about the working account at Iowa Federal. That account is merely bait, dear. The real assets, the $50 million bond portfolio, is secured in the deposit box." "Why don't we just tell them they are cut out, Thomas?" Ellie had asked, rubbing his tired hand. "Because they would spend years fighting the will and wasting our estate on lawyers. I want them to expose their true nature without legal doubt. Let them try to take what they think is everything. When they reach for the bait, that's when the trap closes. The contents of that portfolio are tied to a contingency clause. If they commit any verifiable financial crime against you, the portfolio immediately establishes a self-sustaining, irrevocable trust for ethical agricultural research, bypassing them entirely." Ellie had memorized the details, especially the location of the safety deposit box. A small, nearly defunct bank in a neighboring, forgotten farming community, a place Robert and Diana wouldn't dream of visiting. As Christmas Eve approached, Robert and Diana ramped up the pressure. They exchanged knowing glances when they thought Ellie wasn't looking. They had planned the theft months in advance, settling on a timing they believed was foolproof. Christmas Eve, late afternoon. They believed they needed to move quickly, before Ellie could change her will and leave them nothing but the small farmstead. They were about to learn that they were not just stealing money. They were triggering a legal detonation timed precisely by their late, brilliant father. Ellie watched them plotting, her fingers flying over the yarn. She was not a distressed widow. She was an executioner awaiting the signal. The hours leading up to the great betrayal were thick with false cheer. Chelsea, Robert's wife, was hosting a small, exclusive cocktail party for friends who believed Christmas Eve was best celebrated with expensive canapés and judgmental whispers. Robert was busy acting the host, distracted by the fluctuating prices on the commodities market, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Diana was pretending to help Chelsea, but her eyes kept drifting toward the digital clock on the mantel. The plan was simple, relying on three assumptions: Ellie's technological incompetence, her emotional distraction, and the banking system's holiday dormancy. Diana approached Ellie, who was knitting by the fire, a serene picture of elderly relaxation. "Oh, Mom, look how warm it is by the fire," Diana cooed, slipping her phone out of her pocket. "I want to take a picture and send it to your old friends in Iowa so they know you're safe and cozy with us." "Just smile, Mom." "But wait, can you look up that picture of the prize-winning squash you grew last fall? I need it for a reference photo." Ellie, feigning slight confusion, reached into her pocket for her own phone, a basic, functional model she used primarily for calls. "Oh dear, that squash picture. I think that's on the old tablet. It's too heavy for me to get." This was the opening they needed. Diana moved immediately to Ellie's suitcase, retrieving the heavy, outdated tablet, ostensibly to look for the squash photo. "No problem, Mom. I'll find it. Just tell me the passcode, please." Ellie rattled off the passcode for the tablet, which Diana carefully noted. She spent the next 10 minutes scrolling through innocuous photos, confirming Ellie's complete lack of suspicion. "Found it." "Perfect, Mom," Diana said, returning the tablet and slipping back into the crowd, her heart thumping with anticipation. The target wasn't the tablet. It was the tiny handwritten sticky note taped to the back of the device, which Diana had peeled off. It contained Ellie's highly secure, 11-digit, alphanumeric password for the Iowa Federal Online Banking Portal. The simple truth was that Ellie found it impossible to memorize the long, complex code, a fact she had once mentioned in passing years ago. Diana immediately slipped away to the master bathroom, the only place she knew had a sturdy lock and good Wi-Fi coverage. She handed the sticky note to Robert, who was waiting inside, his face pale with a mix of anxiety and avarice. "She bought it. She thinks I'm sending a photo," Diana whispered, locking the heavy bathroom door. Robert pulled out his own, far more powerful, encrypted laptop. He logged into the Iowa Federal Bank portal. The security was robust, multi-factor authentication, biometric prompts, but Thomas, years ago, had set up Ellie's account for ease of use in her small local community, overriding most complex external security layers and relying instead on the unique, complicated password. Robert entered the 11 digits. The screen flickered, and then the account dashboard materialized. Balance: $348,762.19. Robert gasped, a silent, greedy sound. "It's more than we thought. Nearly $350,000. We can wipe out the Miami debt, and I can cover the margin call on the January futures." Diana was shaking with nervous excitement. "Transfer it all, Robert. Now. To the offshore holding account we set up last month. Use the automated wire system. It won't clear until January 2nd, the first banking day after the holiday lockdown. She won't know a thing until the new year." Robert initiated the maximum immediate transfer allowed by the bank's daily limit, ensuring they would drain the account dry. The transfer confirmation flashed green on the screen. $348,762.19 successfully transferred. They looked at the screen, the large, vibrant number now replaced by a chillingly small figure. Current balance: $74.52. They had done it. They had stolen nearly $350,000 from their widowed mother on Christmas Eve. A profound sense of relief, coupled with a bitter triumph, washed over them. This was the money that would save them both. The watchful widow. Meanwhile, downstairs by the fire, Ellie didn't need the chime of a text alert or an email notification to know the theft was complete. She felt the shift in the house's energy. She saw Diana emerge from the master suite, her face flushed with adrenaline, and slip her a quick, triumphant nod. Ellie had been aware of the sticky note, the lost password, and the squash picture ploy. She had anticipated every move. She knew that the old password, a relic of Thomas's early simplicity, was their primary target. Ellie reached into her apron pocket and touched the worn, antique brass key that she carried everywhere. A heavy, cold object that offered more security than the $350,000 that had just vanished. That key didn't open her Iowa bank safety deposit box. That key opened the safety deposit box at the defunct obscure bank 30 miles from the farm, the one they never knew about, the one Thomas had referred to as the Vance Contingency Vault. Ellie mentally ran through the checklist Thomas had given her. Children attempt to access and transfer liquid funds, completed. Transfer must occur after 4 p.m. on the last banking day before Christmas, completed, 5:15 p.m., Christmas Eve. The act must be verifiable as fraudulent access. The bank's IP logs would show access from a known Chicago address and a massive wire transfer easily traced. The children's greed had officially triggered the contingency clause. Thomas, through his meticulous planning, had ensured that the moment the money was taken, the full weight of the estate, the $50 million portfolio, was legally detached from the Vance children. Ellie smiled faintly into her knitting. They thought they had secured their future. They had actually secured the date of their ruin. Robert and Diana finally joined the party, their demeanor altered by their success. They were overly solicitous towards Ellie, pouring her tea and fetching her blankets, mistaking her quietude for gratitude for their presence. They had no idea they were sitting on a financial time bomb set to detonate on January 2nd, the day the wire transfer cleared, and the bank notified Ellie of the missing funds. Christmas Day in the Vance household was a study in theatrical generosity. Robert and Diana, relieved that the massive transfer had successfully been initiated and confident their mother remained oblivious, overcompensated spectacularly. They were trying to manufacture enough goodwill to cover their $350,000 fraud. The gift-giving ceremony began with an almost indecent haste. Robert and Diana presented Ellie with lavish, expensive gifts, items that were clearly meant to satisfy their own need for display rather than her simple tastes. Robert gave her a subscription to an exclusive high-end meal delivery service for gourmet, easy-to-prepare meals, implying that she was too old and frail to cook for herself. "Now, Mom, you don't have to worry about the market or the logistics of food shopping," Robert announced to the room, casting a smug glance at Chelsea, who nodded approvingly. "We're taking care of you. It's the least we can do." Diana's gift was a week-long all-expenses-paid stay at a luxury spa resort in Sedona, framed as a necessary escape for your grief. "You need to heal, Mom, and you can't do that worrying about the farm or finances," Diana said, kissing Ellie dramatically on the cheek. "Just relax. We'll even find a way to manage your bills while you're gone." Ellie received the gifts with quiet dignity. She thanked them, but her eyes held a spark of knowing contempt. They weren't giving her gifts. They were trying to buy her silence and validate their narrative of her incompetence. Ellie's gift to them, however, was simple and deeply rooted in the past. She had baked them each a small, perfect batch of Thomas's favorite shortbread cookies, wrapped in simple parchment paper, tied with twine. "Oh, cookies," Diana said, her face falling slightly, trying to mask her disappointment that it wasn't a diamond necklace or a large check. "How traditional." "Yes," Ellie replied, her voice soft. "Thomas always said that the truly valuable gifts are the ones that can't be bought. They are the ones remembered." The excursion. The children's complacency was shattered only by their mother's sudden, unexpected announcement after the noon meal. "Robert, Diana, I have a slight errand to run," Ellie said, placing her coffee cup down. I need to drive back to Iowa briefly. A very old friend, Agnes, is having a medical emergency, and she requires a set of Thomas's old medical records that I know she needs immediately. She lives quite far, so I must leave now and come back late tonight." Robert frowned. "Mom, that's a 6-hour drive each way. You can't drive that far alone on Christmas Day. We'll hire a car service." "No, absolutely not," Ellie insisted gently. "Agnes is very private, and the records are sensitive. I must deliver them myself. I'm from Iowa, Robert. I know how to drive in the cold." Diana was immediately suspicious, but Robert, consumed by his own anxiety over the $350,000 transfer, dismissed it. The bank was closed. The funds were secure in the offshore account. The last thing he needed was his mother creating a scene. "Fine, but drive safely, Mom," Robert sighed, already checking the commodity futures again. He didn't even walk her to the door. Ellie left the Chicago penthouse, not toward the vast stretches of western Illinois, but toward the relative anonymity of the smaller, eastern edge of Iowa. Her destination was the town of Carthage, a place so insignificant that Robert and Diana didn't even know it existed. The bank she sought was Carthage Heritage Savings, a nearly invisible brick building on a quiet, snow-dusted street. She knew the branch manager, Mr. Peterson, was an old family friend who kept discreet hours for long-standing clients. She arrived shortly after 5 p.m. Mr. Peterson, bundled in a heavy coat, met her in the quiet lobby. "Ellie, I'm so sorry about Thomas. And I understand why you're here," Peterson said, shaking her hand firmly. "He told me this contingency plan was the only way to safeguard your future." "He knew they wouldn't stop, Mr. Peterson," Ellie replied, holding out the brass key. "They took the liquid funds last night. The timer has started." Peterson led her to the secure vault area, where she used the antique key to unlock the safety deposit box. It was slightly larger than a shoebox, and inside, nestled on a bed of heavy velvet, was not cash, but a series of official-looking certificates and a thick, leather-bound ledger. The first document was a full, certified statement of assets, detailing the $50 million current value of the corporate and agricultural bond portfolio. The second was a contingency trust agreement, signed and notarized by Thomas. Ellie looked at the document, feeling a surge of powerful gratitude for her husband's foresight. The agreement explicitly stated that the moment any child committed a verifiable act of financial malfeasance against Eleanor Vance by accessing or moving funds from her primary accounts without her express, written legal consent, the entire $50 million portfolio was immediately to be placed into a newly created, irrevocable Vance Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, with Eleanor Vance named as the sole lifetime administrator and beneficiary of all passive income. This meant the children, by stealing $350,000, had unwittingly forfeited $50 million. Ellie carefully placed the documents in a secure, fireproof travel pouch. "Now, Mr. Peterson," Ellie said, zipping the pouch closed. "On the morning of January 2nd, when the Iowa Federal Bank calls me to notify me of the missing funds, I will instruct them to initiate a full audit. That same morning, I want you to initiate the legal transfer of this portfolio, with the full documentation sent to Robert and Diana's law firms. I want their Christmas to truly end on New Year's Day." Mr. Peterson nodded, impressed by her cold, quiet resolve. "It will be done, Ellie. Thomas would be very proud." Ellie drove back to Chicago in the snow, the $50 million secured on the passenger seat, the weight of the enormous portfolio resting safely in her hands. She was no longer a vulnerable widow. She was the sole powerful agent of her husband's legacy. The days between Christmas and New Year's felt like a suffocating pressure cooker in the Chicago penthouse. For Robert and Diana, the initial euphoria of their successful Christmas Eve heist had curdled into a slow, acidic anxiety. The $350,000 was securely in their offshore account, but it wouldn't be accessible until January 2nd, the first business day of the year. Until then, they were trapped in a gilded cage of waiting. Their primary source of unease was Ellie. The moment she returned from her mysterious errand late on Christmas night, her entire demeanor had changed. The quiet frailty they had relied upon was gone, replaced by a steely, almost serene detachment. She moved through the house like a ghost of judgment, knitting without urgency, reading thick books on agricultural economics, subjects she had never publicly shown interest in, and spending long, private hours on her small phone. She was speaking in hushed, specific tones to unseen people, using phrases like irrevocable trust, contingency vesting, and certified delivery. Robert, increasingly stressed by the market and the risk of the offshore transfer being flagged, tried to re-establish control. "Mom, who were you speaking to just now?" Robert demanded one afternoon, finding her on the balcony, watching the skyline. "It sounded like you were talking to a lawyer." "About what?" Ellie smiled faintly. "Oh, Robert, you know how Thomas was. He left many tedious administrative details to finalize. I was just speaking to Mr. Peterson in Carthage. He's finalizing the transfer of Thomas's old partnership stake in the land trust to a new administrator." The mention of Carthage, a name they had never heard before, and land trust, was deliberately vague but deeply unsettling. Robert and Diana exchanged panicked glances. They had been so focused on the liquid cash account that they had never considered any hidden, illiquid assets that might be registered locally, outside the main estate documentation. The New Year's anxiety. As the clock ticked toward January 1st, their anxiety manifested in paranoia. Diana, desperate to confirm the transfer was secure, kept logging into her offshore account, refreshing the page to see the pending $350,000. What if the Iowa bank noticed the zero balance and called her? Diana worried aloud to Robert, who was chain-smoking on the patio. "They are closed until Tuesday, Diana. We timed it perfectly. The wire is automated. She won't get a statement or an alert until after the new year," Robert insisted, though his bravado was hollow. Ellie, watching them from the kitchen, noted their visible distress. It was not guilt that tormented them, but the fear of losing their ill-gotten gains. On New Year's Eve, as the city prepared for fireworks, Ellie decided to accelerate their misery. She sat them down and presented them with 2 envelopes, each containing a simple printed note. "Children, before midnight, I wanted to give you each a final thought from your father's last wishes," Ellie announced, her voice gentle yet formal. The notes were identical, printed in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting. A note on legacy. Robert/Diana. "Remember that true legacy is not what you take from the world, but what you choose to put back into it. Always look beyond the obvious structure. Sometimes, the most valuable things are secured in the places you would never think to look." "Dad." Robert scoffed, crushing the note in his hand. "Sentimental nonsense, Mom. What structure? What are you talking about?" "Oh, just Thomas being poetic," Ellie replied, offering no explanation. She knew the vague, unsettling reference to the obvious structure, and places you would never think to look, would drive them mad over the next 24 hours. That night, Ellie retired early, locking her door. She wasn't sleeping. She was waiting for the perfect, calculated moment. The call that changed everything. At exactly 9 a.m. on January 2nd, the moment the Iowa Federal Bank opened for business and the offshore wire transfer was scheduled to complete, Ellie's small phone vibrated with an incoming call. It was Ms. Davies, the manager of the Iowa Federal Bank. Robert and Diana, who had been hovering near the main line since 8 a.m., heard the distant ring. They froze, watching Ellie answer her call on the balcony. "Yes, Ms. Davies. I understand completely," Ellie said calmly, projecting her voice just enough to carry over the polished floor. "The wire transfer was processed? And yes, I can see the discrepancy on my online account now. $348,762.19, correct?" Robert's heart slammed against his ribs. She knew. She saw the zero balance. Their meticulously planned silence had been broken instantly. Ellie continued, her voice now firm and laced with barely contained anger. "Yes, Ms. Davies. I am absolutely certain I did not authorize that wire transfer. I need you to initiate a full bank fraud investigation and audit immediately. I believe I know who accessed the account, and I want the IP logs, the timestamps, and the complete transaction history sent directly to my legal counsel, Mr. Abernathy, this afternoon." She hung up the phone and walked back into the living room, facing her horrified children. Robert, attempting a final, desperate bluff, stepped forward. "Mom, what are you doing? Why did you call the police? It's probably just a phishing scam. You should never have clicked on that link." Ellie looked at him, her eyes cold as Iowa ice. "It was not a phishing scam, Robert. The transaction logs will show that the access point originated from this location, and the funds were routed to a private holding account owned by you and Diana." She held up the ancient brass key, letting it catch the morning light. "You risked your father's savings account, our family's safety net, for a quick cash grab," Ellie stated, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You stole what you thought was everything. Now, because of your verifiable act of financial malfeasance, you have triggered a legal contingency that revokes your access to the true estate." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of a distant ambulance, or perhaps just Robert's crushing realization. The aftermath of Ellie's chilling announcement, the mention of the legal contingency, and the verifiable act of financial malfeasance, plunged Robert and Diana into a deep, desperate panic. Their initial goal had been to solve their short-term debt. Their current reality was facing felony charges and the potential loss of their entire inheritance. "Mom, stop!" Robert yelled, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. A loan. We were going to put it back immediately after the New Year's market opened. Just call the bank back. We'll reverse the wire right now." "It is far too late for that, Robert," Ellie said, walking toward the large living room windows, the Chicago skyline a cold backdrop to their collapse. "The moment you executed the transfer from the Iowa federal account, the contingency was triggered. Your father was very explicit in his estate planning." Diana, tears streaming down her face, grabbed Robert's arm. "We have to call a lawyer. If we return the money, maybe we can say it was a family loan that went wrong." Robert immediately placed a call to his high-powered corporate attorney, Mr. Thorne, who specialized in high-stakes financial litigation. "Mr. Thorne, it's Robert Vance. I have a major, immediate legal emergency concerning my father's estate. We need to discuss a fraudulent wire transfer, yes, about $350,000, and a potential contingency clause," Robert stammered into the phone. The lawyer was calm but serious. "Robert, I need to see the full will, specifically the section relating to your mother's liquid accounts. Fraud is serious, even if it's family money. But a contingency clause in an estate plan is a tightrope. It's designed to be irreversible if triggered." While Robert was on the phone, Ellie made her own call. She dialed a number she had never used before, the direct line for the estate lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, who Thomas had trusted implicitly. "Mr. Abernathy, this is Eleanor Vance. Thomas's contingency has been triggered," Ellie stated formally. "I have the original portfolio ledger and the trust documentation from Carthage. I need you to confirm receipt and initiate the full legal notification to Robert and Diana Vance's counsel immediately." The lawyer's confirmation. Within an hour, a tense email arrived simultaneously in the inboxes of Robert Vance and Diana Vance from Mr. Abernathy's office. It was addressed to them, their spouses, and their legal representatives. The email was stark and official. Subject: Irrevocable Vance Estate Contingency. Immediate notification. Dear Mr. Robert Vance and Ms. Diana Vance, please be advised that as of 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, January 2, 2025, the contingency clause in the late Thomas Vance's estate plan has been officially triggered by a verifiable act of financial malfeasance directed against Eleanor Vance's primary liquid accounts. Pursuant to the terms of the irrevocable trust agreement, the following asset is being immediately diverted and legally separated from the primary estate and any claims by yourselves, your spouses, or your descendants. Asset: the Vance Agricultural and Corporate Bond Portfolio current valuation. $50 million, $50 million US. This portfolio is now vested in the newly established and permanent Vance Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture as a non-profit endowment. Mrs. Eleanor Vance has been designated as the sole, irrevocable lifetime administrator of the foundation and the beneficiary of all income generated by the portfolio. We have included documentation of the trust agreement and the current statement of assets for your review. Any further attempts to access or disrupt Mrs. Vance's personal or foundation accounts will be met with immediate legal action and full exposure of the financial fraud to the relevant authorities. Robert finished reading the email, the screen swimming before his eyes. He slowly lowered his phone, the expensive glass shattering on the marble floor. $50 million, he croaked, the number impossible to reconcile with the $350,000 they had just stolen. He had $50 million, and we didn't even know it existed. We risked our entire inheritance for $300,000. Diana collapsed into a chair, letting out a raw, desperate sob that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with monumental, unforgivable failure. Ellie watched them, her face devoid of pity. You were too busy looking at the bait to notice the ocean, children. Your father secured the $50 million in an antiquated bond portfolio outside the main trust precisely because he knew you would audit the wrong accounts. He wanted to see if your character would hold up under the temptation of instant liquidity. It did not. The hidden structure. Robert's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, called back immediately, his voice now high-pitched with alarm. Robert, I've reviewed the documentation. This is unprecedented. Your father used a classic contingency trust structure, a method common in large, dynastic estates to protect assets from frivolous heirs. The moment you performed that wire transfer, the trust was activated, and the $50 million, which he successfully hid in an untraceable, non-public portfolio for 20 years, is legally gone from your hands forever. Thorne paused. Furthermore, the Iowa Federal Bank Fraud Report makes you personally liable for a felony. If your mother doesn't drop the charges immediately, you are both facing prison time, regardless of whether you return the money. She is the administrator of $50 million, and you are petty thieves. Robert, reduced to a desperate, whining child, turned to his mother. Mom, please. Don't do this. We'll return the money. We'll never ask for another dime. We'll give you the penthouse. Just call off the audit and dissolve the trust. Ellie looked at the broken man who was once her little boy. Your father wanted me to have peace, Robert. And now, I have the financial security to guarantee that peace. The $50 million bond portfolio is not for my comfort. It is for my protection. I am protected from your greed, your mistakes, and your betrayal. The trust is irrevocable, Robert, Ellie concluded, using the same precise legal term the lawyer had used. Your father ensured that the consequences of your actions are permanent. The revelation of the $50 million irrevocable trust and the permanent forfeiture of their inheritance sent Robert and Diana into a frenzy of desperate action. They were not only financially ruined, having counted on the stolen $350,000 to cover mounting debts, but they were legally exposed. The Iowa Federal Bank had officially filed a preliminary fraud report with the FBI, forcing Robert's lawyer, Mr. Thorne, to act as a crisis manager. We have two options, Robert, Thorne barked over the phone. Option 1. We return the $350,000 immediately, hope the bank drops the civil suit, and pray your mother doesn't press criminal charges. Option 2. You try to challenge the irrevocable trust, which is ironclad, and commit career suicide. Robert, refusing to accept that $50 million was truly gone, chose option 2. He ordered Thorne to challenge the contingency clause, arguing undue influence on the part of Thomas Vance while he was ill. The public exposure. The local finance and society pages, already buzzing about the unexpected disappearance of the Vances from the holiday social scene, picked up on the story immediately. Robert Vance's sudden legal challenges to his father's estate, coupled with his unexplained leave of absence from the commodities firm, generated explosive speculation. A minor financial blog, specializing in estate analysis, published the full outline of the contingency trust, sourced by Mr. Abernathy's office as a clarification of facts. The article detailed Thomas Vance's meticulous planning to protect his wife and his legacy from frivolous and predatory claims by his descendants. The story went viral. Headline: Vance heirs disinherited after Grand Christmas Eve heist of bait account. The public and professional scorn was immediate. Robert was branded as a greedy, incompetent thief who lost $50 million for $350,000. His firm, already struggling with the ethical optics of having a suspected felon on staff, used the public embarrassment as grounds for termination. Robert lost his job, his primary income stream, and critically, the support of Chelsea, who immediately filed for divorce, citing the loss of the estate and the pending fraud charges as grounds for financial instability. Diana's world imploded simultaneously. Her luxury lifestyle was exposed as a hollow facade. Her creditors, realizing her anticipated inheritance was gone, descended. Her most recent boutique consulting firm folded, and she was forced to sell her high-end condo in Miami to cover mounting debts. The final attempt at control. 3 weeks after the new year, defeated and homeless, Robert and Diana drove to their mother's quiet, unassuming Iowa farmstead. They had nowhere else to go. They found Ellie outside, bundled against the January wind, overseeing the construction of a massive new greenhouse, the first project of the newly funded Vance Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture. She was speaking enthusiastically with 2 young agricultural engineers about vertical farming techniques. Robert and Diana approached her, their faces etched with desperation, dropping their cheap suitcases onto the frozen ground. "Mom, please. We are ruined," Diana wept, reaching for her. "We have no jobs, no homes. Please, we beg you, drop the charges. Just give us enough to live on. $1 million each. You have $50 million. Robert, still trying to use logic, appealed to the portfolio's liquidity. "Mom, you can't run a foundation alone. Give me access to the bond portfolio. I can manage the investments, handle the leverage, and still give you the foundation income. Let me save the $49 million we have left." Ellie paused, turning away from the excited engineers. She looked at her children, truly seeing them for the first time in months, not as entitled adults, but as moral and financial derelicts. "You don't understand, do you?" Ellie said, her voice dropping to a cool, quiet register. "The $50 million is not for me to spend on a lavish retirement. The income is for my security and for the Foundation's mission. The capital is locked away, protected by the trust from every claim, including yours." She walked over to a new, small shed on the property, where a complex, digital ledger was bolted to the wall. This was the Foundation's real-time financial dashboard. "Your father taught me a final lesson," Ellie continued, pointing to the screen. 1 year had passed since the calculated chill of Christmas Eve had ripped through the Vance family. The Chicago penthouse, once a monument to Robert and Veronica's transactional existence, had been foreclosed upon. The $50 million bond portfolio, the existence of which they had ignored in their greedy pursuit of $350,000, remained untouched, a perpetual engine of good, secured from their reckless hands forever. Ellie Vance, the quiet matriarch from Iowa, was no longer defined by vulnerability or grief. She was the sole administrator of the Vance Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, a title that lent her a quiet, immense authority. The foundation had flourished. On a crisp December morning, exactly 1 year after the contingent trust was activated, Ellie was preparing for the grand opening of the Thomas Vance Research Center. The farmstead, once modest, now hummed with purpose. A state-of-the-art vertical farming complex stood where an old barn used to be, powered entirely by renewable energy. Young scientists and agronomists, funded by the annual income of the $50 million portfolio, were pioneering drought-resistant crops. Ellie stood on the newly built observation deck, addressing the assembly of local farmers, students, and reporters. The peace that settled over her was not the peace of resignation, but the quiet strength of vindication. She was honoring her husband's legacy in a way that truly benefited the community, something Robert and Diana would never have allowed. The consequences of the ledger. The consequences for her children were permanent and tailored to their specific sins. Robert Vance had tried to leverage his way out of the disaster. He had declared bankruptcy, but the unresolved fraud charges from the Iowa Federal Bank permanently stained his record. He couldn't secure a high-level job, as no compliance department would touch him. The man who once traded millions in commodities was last seen working as an assistant manager at a shipping logistics warehouse in suburban Indiana, his expensive suits replaced by a polyester uniform. Every morning, he looked at his paycheck and remembered the $50 million he had lost because he couldn't resist stealing $300,000. Diana Vance fared worse. The public humiliation and the barrage of debt collectors were overwhelming. Stripped of the superficial wealth that defined her, she lost her entire social circle. She was forced to move back to the rural Midwest, working odd jobs to service the mountains of unsecured debt. She often wrote bitter, pleading emails to Ellie, which Ellie's legal team filed without response. They had stolen liquidity, and in return, they received permanent scarcity. The finality of the trust. The bond portfolio itself was the final, elegant checkmate. As an irrevocable trust, the principal could not be touched. Robert, in his final attempt to appeal, had argued to Abernathy that the money was sitting idle. Idle. Abernathy had scoffed during the final mediation. The foundation's income alone is paying for 5 full-time research grants and providing thousands of meals to food banks through the vertical farm. The $50 million is not liquid capital, Mr. Vance. It is a firewall, protecting a legacy from the very type of avarice you demonstrated. At the opening ceremony, Ellie looked out at the faces of the people who genuinely valued stewardship and honest labor. She was finally free. She had traded the gilded prison of Chicago, the emotional cost of her children's greed, and the stress of a precarious future for absolute, ethical, and secure wealth. Her hidden wealth had not been a retirement fund. It had been a deterrent, a legal weapon against betrayal. As she stepped to the podium, she didn't talk about money, she talked about character. My name is Eleanor Vance, and this is the story of how my husband and I turned our greatest financial asset into the ultimate character test for our children. They believed they were smarter than the system and that my grief made me an easy target. They targeted a few $100,000, unaware that it was merely bait protecting $50 million. They proved their character for a small short-term gain, and in doing so, they forfeited a permanent legacy. The greatest wealth is not what you possess, but what you protect. Integrity is the only financial asset that can never be seized or leveraged. My children lost $50 million because they lacked the integrity required to inherit 50 cents. If you build your house on greed, the foundation will always crack. I am not a victim. I am the protector of a legacy, and that is a priceless piece. If my story of financial justice and hidden strength resonates with you, please share it. Let it be a reminder that you are never too old, and your assets are never too small, to plan for your protection. Thank you for hearing her story from Iowa.